get with it. What's going on, guys? It's your boy Anthony alongside the best Big 3 account in the universe, Big 3 News, aka Will, back with another edition of the Fourth Man. Took a little bit of a break. It doesn't look like there's a change of scenery here, but there has been a little bit back here, and we're going to come to you guys with a lot of news today. But first and foremost, my guy, how's everything going? I know there's been some changes in your neck of the woods as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been, I feel like we really had a bit of a busy stretch in both of our lives personally. So we were like, all right, we can't record these. I think it was like a week we really missed, right? Or maybe 2 weeks
Yeah,
when this eventually comes out. But I feel like the last episode, I was in a very different place than this episode, which is crazy. And the cool thing is, I think the Big 3 was as well. So we have a ton to recap. I think we were thinking about whether we'd have a guest on this episode, maybe not. But eventually, after a while, we were like, we just have way too much to talk about.
Yeah, I know. It felt like we had a couple guests lined up, and then the news just kept piling on and piling on. The episode was going to get longer, so we were like, let's just break this down. There's a lot of good stuff. It's the episode of change here. It kind of seems like you said,
the episode of change.
It seems like we're in totally new places in our lives, and so is the Big 3 as well going into season 4. So let's get into it. But before we get into it, if you want to find our socials at Fourth Man Pod, at Fourth Man Pod, at Big 3 News, at @A_Siggy. Man, you can really tell it's been 1 week
That didn't
off.
change. That didn't change.
That didn't change.
A lot has changed. That didn't change.
Our faces also didn't change. So if you want to watch the show on youtube.com/fourthmanpod, subscribe there. The content's only going to get better now that we're a little bit more subtle, adjusted, and the Big 3 continues to ramp up with some moves. And as always, for those of you listening on Dash Radio on the Nothing But Net channel on this fine Saturday afternoon, we appreciate you guys as always. Appreciate Dash Radio for giving us the platform to share some Big 3 stuff with you guys. And let's just jump right into it. 3 teams with some major changes. Major changes. Probably the most shakeup I've seen since we started covering the Big 3 from year 1, just like within a week span, I should say. But let's start with the smallest one here, or I should say the team who made the least amount of moves is a better way to put it. Not small by any means, because our guy Frank Nitti goes from Big 3 prospect to on draft night going to co-captain out of nowhere. And now it's going into his second season. He's going to be the captain of Killer 3s. He's been promoted. I got to say I was a little shocked, but Will, how'd you feel about the move from Frank Nitti? See his second year of playing in the Big 3, now being a captain for Killer 3s, the runner-up from last year.
Yeah, I'll say this. When on the podcast, I said I really think that Killer 3's captain spot, if you were an outsider of the Big 3, was either, if you wanted success, it was pretty lucrative,
right?
Because that was a ready-made championship contender. But if you weren't, let's say, looking for success and more so just looking for control, and you wanted to bring in your guys, which we will talk about later in this episode, maybe that wasn't really the spot for you, because that was a ready-made champ. What? Something just happened?
We just got some news.
What happened?
3's company has made their next co-captain spot. Mario Chalmers will be headed to 3's company alongside Drew Gooden and DeMar Johnson.
No way.
The episode of change. This is crazy.
Oh my God. This gotta be the first time that's ever happened.
We usually record too early. We're spot on today. This is crazy.
That's something that's a good change. Oh my gosh.
All right.
I gotta tweet about this.
Yeah. So, and while you're doing that, our Woj of the Big 3, I should say, I'll kind of talk about just how I feel about the Killer 3's move for Frank Nitti, and I'll kind of touch on what you were saying. If you were a guy that was coming in from the outside, if you're a Michael Beasley, a Lance Stevenson or something, and you wanted to play in the Big 3, you wanted a big captain spot, this would be the team to go to if you wanted a ready-made team to ultimately come in and try to win. But Killer 3's was like, hey, we were running most of our team back outside of stack, and let's just promote from within. We've seen this with a couple of teams already. Ghost Ballers is one team that did that. And I guess Killer 3's kind of took the same mindset. Frank Nitti did have a promising, rookie season, as we call it, coming in. He was a big contributor for this Killer 3's teams. I thought maybe it was going to be someone like Josh Powell, who's been in the league for a while, been on Killer Threes for a while, but it looks like it's going to be Frank Nitti, and there's one more co-captain spot open, and I think this is still a team that has a lot of promise because they can bring in somebody. We see a lot of the co-captain spots being filled from guys that played in the Big 3 last year. That's something they could do. We know, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. There's a big name right now on the, I guess, free agent market, as you want to call it, that could potentially come in and be a great co-captain fill-in. So Frank Nitti being promoted, I think it's a good move for Killer Threes. And I think I think a lot of people, Frank Nitti is a guy that a lot of people gravitate toward him, I feel like. And I think with his connections in the Drew, with his connections, just in basketball in general, being a streamer, I think there's a lot of guys he can bring to the table. And I think that's kind of whether he promotes from or whether he adds a co-captain from within the Big 3 or outside the Big 3. I think that's what makes him so dangerous, as putting his GM cap on. He's going to be able to bring in a lot of options.
Yeah, I mean, well, let me just say this. I think as I'm still sort of kind of digesting, my brain's really thinking about this Mario
I
Chalmers
should have waited
stuff.
a little bit, but my eyes just peaked up, because
No, it's all right. You
we
were
have the
like,
Big 3 notifications on.
I was like, when you made that face, I was like, did I really say something that crazy? I really don't think I did. And then I was like, did something happen? Like, what's going on? But anyway, back to Frank Nitti. I think my number one concern for Killer Threes was that you were going to have to find somebody to replace Steven Jackson. And Steven Jackson was a top, 3 to 5 player in the league last year. So you're basically saying, if you're Killer Threes, you have the faith in Frank Nitti to evolve into season 2 into that type of player. And to be honest with you, we have seen most guys who are successful in season 1. They usually have greater success in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
Not too many guys hit a sophomore slump. It's usually the opposite. And we've just seen Frank Nitti, who has been playing professionally overseas, who's been absolutely killing it. I think it's Abu Dhabi, right? He's been playing.
Mm-hmm.
He's just been absolutely killing it over there. So he's in shape. You know that he's playing at a very high level at the moment. He's young. This is somebody for Killer Threes. This isn't a move just for now. This is a move for the next 5 years. And I think exactly what you said. Frank Nitti knows a ton of guys, especially as we open it up to the general public and to hoopers. And like you said, to celebrities. That's somebody who can continue bringing and recruiting guys to Killer Threes. If I were to make a suggestion, Joe, though, or not a suggestion, more of a prediction, at this point in time, I think that co-captain spot's got to go to Dante Green.
Hey, I agree too. I really like if they were to continue to promote from within, but as we continue to talk about a little bit more news, I think there's a spot. I think that spot could be filled by somebody else as well. But I'll get your thoughts on it when we get to that point.
There absolutely is somebody else that I know who you're gonna say, and absolutely I couldn't agree more. And we'll get to it when we get to it. But I just feel like Dante Green, the way that he's played in the TBT, in the 5 tournament, and even like towards the end of last year, I mean, he has just been almost like getting better each time that I see him.
Well, not to mention, I just feel like this team's in sync, right? I mean, this team really felt like they just had a lot of chemistry from the jump. I mean, even that first game without Stack, they were losing by a lot. They were able to come back and win essentially in the Big 3 overtime.
Absolutely.
And they just came together real quick. And I think from there, they just kind of ran with it. So it would make a lot of sense.
And I think, too, from a strategy perspective, it's just basically how much faith do you have in your guys? And I think this move reflects that they have a lot of faith in Frank Nitti. So if you have the same type of faith in Dante Green, you say, all right, either we're winning the championship or we're losing in the championship. That's the only way we can retain Dante Green again. But any team could still at any time offer him the co-captain spot. So I think at this point in time, if you want to keep Dante Green and just sort of, have him on lock, then you make him a co-captain. And to be honest with you, at this point in time, I think it's well deserved from him. And so I don't know, Killer 3 is going to be a good team, but like I always said, they're going to have to find somebody to replace Steven Jackson. And if it's Frank Nitti, then Frank Nitti's going to have to continue to develop and continue to have an upward trajectory. And if they end up promoting Dante Green or even promoting CJ Watson to co-captain and they get an extra draft pick, they're going to have a good draft. Because as much as this is a good team, Steven Jackson was the heart and soul of that team. And it's hard to replace that.
Yeah, and I think they might have to do it collectively, but we've also seen, too, that when 2 teams go to the championship, one team tends to be able to kind of replicate their season from before, and the other team seems to fall off, it seems like.
Yeah,
Or take a step back, I should say, not necessarily fall off. Your dog agrees with me.
my
Seems to,
dog absolutely
seems to
agrees with you.
fall off. So, well, we kind of got thrown a little wrench in our, our show here with the news about Three's Company, but another co-captain spot has now been filled, and Three's Company has added third round pick, now co-captain Mario Chalmers to their roster. It was already going to be incredibly hard to replace Andre Emmett, and here's that step trying to do that. Mario Chalmers, a guy who, well, I think the two of us were very surprised that went in the third round, but a guy that people were unsure of. His last time in the NBA, he had a pretty major injury. He's playing overseas at the time, and I think he didn't even show up to the combine. He wasn't even at the draft, and so I guess they were like, "Hey, let's just, why wouldn't we take a flyer on an NBA champion here?" Had an outstanding season for Three-Headed Monsters. A big reason why they made the playoffs for the third season in a row, and deservingly so. Another co-captain spot locked up. Mario Chalmers will be the co-captain for Three's Company. A spot that I thought that same guy I'm thinking of for Killer Threes could have gone to in Three's Company, but nonetheless, Dermar, we know he's one of the better GM captains in the Big Three, and Mario Chalmers will be part of Three's Company next year to help them try to get back to that title game.
I'm just upset that it's not Michael Beasley. I'm happy for Mario Chalmers, but I really had myself convinced that they were getting Michael Beasley.
You were convinced.
I really did.
We talked about this multiple times on the show outside of the podcast, and you're pretty set in stone that it was going to be Michael Beasley. I kind of think now it'd be hard to see him joining the league. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but I thought that was going to be the spot for him. You really had me convinced there.
Yeah, I mean, I had myself convinced, and I think he would have been a great pickup. I think he would have been an MVP candidate. I still think that he will be. I don't know. I thought Three's Company was going to be the spot for him, but hopefully it's somewhere else. But I also, too, I think guys like that, I think everybody wants to be a captain.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with all this influx of youth, you see guys like Mario Chalmers who are like, were publicly campaigning, like, I want to be a captain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I shouldn't, like, guys were like, I shouldn't have to try out, is what it basically comes down to. I should have my spot. So that to me signals. And even too, we saw the comments by Jeff that guys are scared. Guys aren't coming to the combine because they're scared. So that to me is the word around the league is that this is going to be a stacked, deep draft pool with like a ton of young talent. So if that's the case, then maybe Killer Threes is smart by, opening up another co-captain spot, or even possibly all these guys we see, or all these teams, not just Killer Threes, promoting guys internally, just picking up more and more draft picks, basically.
Yeah. Hey, well, if there's anything we know that we don't question Dermar's GM moves.
That's true.
He's constantly made good picks. He's constantly made good pickups. So Dermar Johnson, once again, adding Mario Chalmers, NBA champion, and he had a good season. I feel like as the season continued to go on, Mario Chalmers continued to be a staple within Three-Headed Monsters, starting rotation, closing minutes, and he continued to have highlight play, bigger games, as the season went on. So, another co-captain spot wrapped up. Didn't expect it to be during the time of us recording this, but hey,
I didn't either. I'm still kind of like, I'm like looking down. I gotta like.
I'm still trying to figure out, where I'm going next with this, because I'm.
It threw a wrench in our plans a little bit. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, it did. But I like the move. What do you think, Will, on a scale of 1 to 10?
On the Mario Chalmers move?
Yeah.
1 to 10. I would say a 6.
A 6, really?
Because here's the thing. I think, and it's not really anything against Mario Chalmers. I guess I'm just still really thought they would have gotten Michael Beasley. And I know just like, I don't know. I would say at this point a 6. I think Mario Chalmers could really go out there and have like a very solid year, especially if they play him in a role like they played Andre Emmett, like they played Baron Davis. Mario Chalmers just isn't really a scorer like those guys were.
But I don't think that's really what they needed. I think they needed a ball handler, someone who's going to bring it up the half court each time, have the ball in their hands, and facilitate plays. I think
So then who, in your opinion, then who's like the main scorer on that team? Who's getting the majority of the points?
Well, see, I think that's where the difficulty comes in, but because I think you have to draft somebody at this
Okay.
point who's going
Yeah.
to have to do that for you. I think your first round pick is going to have to be someone who's going to get you buckets because
Yeah.
I don't think that Mario Chalmers can do that. But I think what made Andre Emmett so special outside of him being the go-to scorer was the fact that the defense was always collapsing towards him, and he
Right.
was able to make plays where he was. I think the same thing's going to be there for Mario Chalmers in a sense that defenses are probably going to go to him first if it's the three of the captains on the floor, and he's going to be able to dish it out to Drew Gooden, to DeMar. I think we see more emphasis on DeMar, like picking up the scoring a little bit, doing a little bit more this year rather than last year, where it was kind of just like, give Andre the ball and let him kind of control the flow of the offense and how it runs. But I think, again, if I want anybody to draft me a bucket getter in that first round and, really fill a big void on the team, I'm going to put my faith in DeMar Johnson. So,
well, I mean, DeMar Johnson just doesn't miss on draft picks.
No, he hasn't.
And this is the most loaded draft in Big 3 history. We know that, you know what I mean? And the pool isn't even done yet. And guys are already like
nuts
prioritizing the draft in a way that we haven't seen before in the Big 3. So I'm really excited because I really do believe that there's a team that maybe isn't competing for a championship right now that's going to hit on 2 out of those 3 draft picks. That is going to surprise all of us.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some co-captain spots that are still open. Enemies still has an opening. Aliens could potentially have an opening. We saw that on the recent post you made. Andre Owens said that he had a big secret.
Andre Owens said he has a big secret. I don't know what that means.
I'm still holding out for Lance. Still holding out.
I would love to see Lance Stevenson on that team. I just feel like it makes way too much sense.
It would be cool. I really like the move, but not sure. So I think that's a potential opening. I think outside of that, I think those are really the only 2 that are available. Ball Hogs hasn't made any announcement on exactly who's coming back, but when we spoke with Rick Barry, he said that Brian was working out, so he assumed that was happening. He's been in contact with some of the other guys, the team, or some of the other guys on the team. So the co-captain spots are slowly dwindling, and another big reason why is this next team with Trilogy really making some interesting moves. First and foremost, sucks that Zach Randolph will not be competing in the Big 3 as we all originally thought. He originally signed on in 2020 right before COVID started. And, I think the writing was kind of on the wall. So I think me and you both thought a year away, the interest maybe dwindled a little bit or just different priorities came up in his life. But Zebo's not going to be the captain. That being said, during the midst of that, this has kind of been like a crazy couple months with Trilogy, right? Or just month. During the midst of that, James White had essentially people were campaigning, including himself, for campaigning for James White, a guy who's, was a pioneer for this league, a part of one of the first championships in Trilogy. They were campaigning for him to be the captain. And I think we both thought that was going to be the case at some point. We didn't really even have time to think about other options or, speculate even more before the next day the Big 3 came out and said, hey, big news. Jared Jack's going to be the captain of Trilogy, not Zach Randolph, not James White. Jared Jack, a guy who's been playing with G League Ignite, a guy that we thought, maybe would have joined the Big 3, but we weren't sure. And sure enough, he did. And then brought his buddy from G League Ignite, Amir Johnson, who played in the 5 tournament with a bunch of Big 3 guys, brought him in to be a co-captain. Another downfall to that was David Hawkins is now out as co-captain for Trilogy. He's the guy that we've been referencing. He's the guy that we think, or me personally could think that he'd be a nice fit on Killer Threes. Thought he would return to an old team of Threes company and be a co-captain. That's not the case anymore. A lot of moves going on there. A lot of shuffling for Trilogy, just a lot of retooling as well. What sticks out to you most as the most impactful move, whether it's a gain or a loss?
First, I just feel like you wrapped it up very nicely. You know what I mean? Like you caught everybody up to speed if they've been lacking on the Trilogy news. But my God, they had they had a rebuild and then they collapsed and then they rebuilt again, and now they're kind of at I guess like, okay, like I guess we're ready to go point, like all within like a 2-month span.
Right.
I will say for Zebo, if I've never said before on the podcast, I'll say it again. Those grit and grind Grizzlies teams are my favorite teams of all time. Zebo,
I
Marcus
think
All,
you might have
Tony
mentioned it
Allen,
once or
Mike
twice.
Conley. Rudy Gay. I absolutely love those teams. Jeff Green. And so, listen, I was really excited to see Zebo, and I thought Zebo was going to be like a Reggie Evans type player, someone who's going to get boards and score and, even like a strange way, like space the floor too, just like with like his mid-range shooting. And I just thought that his game fits so well in 3v3, and I really thought that was a great pickup for them. But, unfortunately, we're never going to see it. In terms of James White, I assume that James White was going to be named captain. That's why, but this whole process to me is just very interesting, from a
You mean
big
the
three
process
perspective of
being
becoming
named
a
a
captain.
captain?
Yeah. I mean, we went through this a little bit with Mike Taylor. Mike Taylor basically told us that there's like a committee of players that vote on it. And I don't know if we've ever even gotten the name of those players. It's sort of this like shadow organization that approves and
The
disapproves
Big 3 Illuminati.
that's what I mean, new co-captains. And so, we know this is such a player-centric league, and we had guys like Carlos Arroyo, even David Hawkins when he was still on Trilogy, guys like publicly campaigning for James White to be named captain of Trilogy. And I thought it was absolutely deserved, but I just don't understand how Jarrett Jack became captain. Like, who made that final decision?
Yeah, and I think I'm pretty disappointed about the Hawk move because
I
he
am too.
worked so hard coming from not getting a lot of playing time at all with Three's company, being a late addition, then almost being pretty much being an MVP candidate for Tri-State in year 2, earned the right to be a co-captain in year 3, and then, I mean, I think at that point we understand he wasn't just campaigning for James White because that's his teammate, that's his good friend, but I think also too he's like, hey, there could be some changes made here, and I don't know if I'm ready to change, where I'm at just yet. I just made the move again.
Right.
So it's
I mean,
pretty
Hawk going on his
disappointing.
4th team in 4 seasons.
Yeah, it's pretty disappointing because he's just been I think he's like blazed trails for overseas players. I think
Yeah.
he's really made a name for himself in this league. He's one of those guys that didn't come in with name recognition and now has it. And to see him, it's Jared Jack's team now, so he can do what he wants. But to see him, kind of be released, dumped onto the streets, and now have to find another new home and potentially take a back seat. He might not be a co-captain. Like I was just saying, there's not a lot of spots left open. So to see him potentially take that step backwards is disappointing. But I get, it's the nature of the league. Like you said, it's player centric. The captains are the GMs. They get to make their moves. Jared Jack felt, hey, Amir Johnson, I just played with them. I think he's going to be a good fit. Bigs are highly valued in this league, and I want him on the team. And I'm a little surprised that James White isn't the captain. I'm a little surprised too that he wasn't also dropped and is looking for a new team. But I think that had more to do with the Big 3 recognizing the value he has as being one of the first players on that Trilogy team, to win a championship.
Yeah, I agree. And even too, like when they announced it, they sort of like they posted like they're like only one player left from Trilogy's
Right.
2017 team. That to me like struck me. They probably didn't even mean anything by it, but I was like, I don't know. But I agree with you. I'm not surprised that James White is still there from the perspective that like he doesn't deserve to be there.
Right.
I'm like genuinely surprised that like because I don't know. Hawk told me before that he was out of Trilogy before the news dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And like out of respect for him, I didn't like say anything just because he asked me not to. So I was like, fine. But then when he said that, I basically was like, all right, so what's going on with James White? And and so when he said that, I assumed that James White was gone too. It was just gonna be a new regime in Trilogy, and then that was that. But I don't know. Maybe Jared Jack said we're gonna value somebody who's had success in the Big 3 before, and James White plays an important role on defense. I mean, he's a defensive player of the year, and I don't know, but listen, talk to Hawk. Hawk is probably my favorite player in this league at this point. I mean, I didn't know him from anything when this league started. Termination, he just like grew a name and a brand for himself. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited for that.
Yeah, and I think if there's anybody who's going to fight adversity, Hawk's the guy. He's going to be able to. I think he'd be the guy to prove people wrong. He's going to be the guy to shake it off and be able to move on and fill his role. I mean, this is a guy. Remember, this is a guy with 3 high-profile NBA players on his team, was still able to be like an MVP candidate. So,
yeah, but it was him, Nate, and Stoudemire.
and Jo
Think about
Jermaine
that,
O'Neal.
and Jermaine O'Neal.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And he went out and did his thing. So, I'm not worried about Hawk. I actually said this, and James White agreed, even though he's still a part of Trilogy. I said, whichever team, I said, this is a dope squad, referencing Trilogy, but whichever team gets Hawk is going to be the scariest team next year. And he was like, facts. Because outside of like maybe Ball Hogs, which we don't know what that team's going to look like. What's that?
Maybe not pissed, but you're right.
Oh, yeah.
Now
coming back
he's like
with
motivated.
a
I shouldn't say pissed, but now he's motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And so coming back with maybe a little vengeance. Yeah. I mean, I could still see him joining like one of his old teams, Three's Company, Tri-State. I mean, imagine how dangerous they would be heading Hawk through the draft. If he does fall back in the draft pool, easy #1 pick, right? You would think.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Unless there's somebody who like we just haven't heard of.
Unless there's an active NBA player.
Right, that's what I mean. Unless like Klay Thompson's like, I'm trying to rehab in the Big 3 for a season. Like the #1 pick is David Hawkins.
Yeah.
He was an MVP candidate 2 seasons ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then last season he led the league in steals.
Yeah. He does it on both ends. Yeah, you're right.
That's what I mean. He's like he's a top Big 3 player. He's a top 5 player in the league. I don't think he's going to reach the draft pool.
Well, that being said,
I think he's going to Aliens.
You think he's going to Aliens?
I'm gonna put it on the table. I think he's going to Aliens.
Stanford.
I think that is Andre Owens' surprise.
Oh, I would love that. That's a great move for Aliens. Because
who was Aliens co-captain? You're much better at this than I am.
So it was originally, remember, it was
Rush,
Kendrick.
Right?
It was Kendrick Perkins and Shannon Brown, but then Kendrick Perkins obviously didn't play.
Kendrick Perkins, I never forget that. Kendrick Perkins was like, just got back from my doctor. Apparently, I'm 8 pounds away from diabetes. And I was like, I'm going to take that as you are not playing in the Big 3.
Yeah, that was like, yeah, I don't know what was going on with there, but he was kind of just like show and go there a little bit. But then they drafted Brandon Rush in the 2nd round and then promoted him to co-captain. So I don't know if either of those 2 guys come back. Now we had Kareem Rush on, and from our understanding, it would sound more like Brandon Rush would be the guy to come back as co-captain more so than Shannon Brown, just because, we haven't heard much about either. But if we're going to hear a little bit more about either, it was Brandon. So I would be.
Brandon Rush is like a quality co-captain.
A quality co-captain. Not saying that Shannon Brown's
Brandon
not.
Rush is not the worst co-captain out there.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Not at all.
Like we don't talk about Aliens really at all because they were around for 1 season and didn't really do anything. So there really is like nothing to report. And like they're like, like we said before, they haven't made any moves this offseason. So they kind of just move in silence. But if there was a team that would immediately spark my interest, is if you do Hawk, Andre Owens, Brandon Rush.
Well, think about this now, because if that were the case, if it was those 3 playing, imagine how much that shakes up the league as a whole, because that would mean Shannon Brown's either not coming back or being dropped. That would also mean Greg Oden's not being promoted or not coming back. Imagine if those 2 dudes do come back and they're just not on Aliens, and you put them in the draft pool, how lethal that draft pool is going to be. I mean, that's going to be a hard decision to make.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like we're naming a lot of guys, and
yeah, we're just throwing.
We're no, but I'm saying like we're running out of co-captain spots.
We are,
especially after this Mario Chalmers announcement. All right, so Three's Company is done. Mm-hmm. I mean, let me look. They posted the graphic, right? Is Drew Gooden on the graphic?
Drew Gooden is on the graphic, so he's coming back as co-captain.
So Drew Gooden's coming back. Which I love Drew Gooden. Obviously, he's great, but
and his barber, we love his
barber. Shout out. Oh my God, what was his name? Shout out
boo. You
Jose.
don't
It's like
even.
shout out
Okay, there you
Jose.
go.
Shout out Jose in Orlando, right?
Yeah.
Shout out my Spanish barber Jose in Orlando. But so Three's Company's done, Tri-State's done, Trilogy's done.
Well, let's talk about Tri-State real quick before we get into the teams that are
Yes,
done.
let's do it.
Because Tri-State made a lot of big moves too. Moves I think that shake up the league as well. So we know last year that Jermaine O'Neal was deactivated, had the heart issue going on, was still a part of the board. Doesn't look like he's going to come back and play basketball. It looks like maybe he's done. Also,
But he
looks
is
like
hosting the tryout in Dallas.
he is hosting the trial in
So
Dallas.
he is still very involved in the Big Three.
Exactly. I just don't think he's going to be playing.
Yes.
And so they ran last year with 2 co-captains. Nate Robinson has been promoted to captain, which is not too surprising. Looking at the landscape of that team. And they also named their 2 co-captains. And they promoted Jason Richardson, who was on the team last year, and then named Larry Sanders the co-captain. So 2 things that stick out to me from that is obviously the biggest one. Doesn't look like Amari Stoudemire is coming back to the league. Reigning Defensive Player of the Year, a good 2-year run with the team. Really like that team year 2. I'm really reminiscent on the Tri-State season 2.
2018.
That was a nasty team.
That was such a good. I can't believe
they didn't make it out of the first round of the playoffs, and made it to the championship.
who they lose to. Power, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was a close game too.
That's like one of those teams, right, where it's like they remind me of almost like that Atlanta Hawks team that won like 50 games and was so good, but like then they just ran into the Cavs.
Yeah, it was like
and you're like, you're a great team, but you're not the best team.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm shocked about that. I thought they would have made the champion. They started the year like 4-0 or 5-0.
A better example would probably be the Rockets.
Oh,
they were really like the Rockets, but they just ran into Golden State.
Yeah, year after year after year. Yeah, don't throw them at me. So that's the first thing that sticks out.
That's going to change this year, brother. Don't worry, that's going to change this year, brother.
Yes, sir. So Stoudemire not coming back. I think the second thing that sticks out to me is now from the 2019 draft, the first 3 picks, Royce White, Chris Johnson, Larry Sanders. All 3 of those dudes have now been promoted to co-captain on different teams, which is pretty crazy. I mean, it's like now
different teams from where they were drafted.
Yeah, because Royce White was Enemies #1, now co-captain for Power. Chris Johnson was with Triplets, traded to Ghost Ballers.
Okay,
promoted to Ghost Ballers.
That's crazy.
And then Larry Sanders, which also another thing, like the third thing that would stick out is Three-Headed Monsters just lost 2 key components of their team.
Oh my God!
Sanders and Chalmers.
Basically their bench.
Yeah, I mean that's huge. And
which I will say, if you're running in there with Mahmoud, Richard, and Reggie, you're going to be just fine.
You're going to be just fine.
But it is kind of crazy. We're going to go back and look at pictures of that team, and that's 5 co-captains right there.
Yeah,
that's a captain and 5 co-captains.
I'm trying to think who else we were missing on that team.
They
had Trey Simmons, but then
Trey Simmons for a little bit.
Did they have Al Thornton for a little bit?
A little bit. They kind of were very flexible with that last role. It really was a 5-man rotation.
Yeah. So Tri-State, they made some big moves, and I really like the promotion of Jason Richardson a lot. I also like that he's coming back, but what really sticks out to you about Tri-State? Are they, looking at all the co-captains, would you put them in the top 3 of co-captains, or do you look at them like, those moves are all right?
I tend to lean towards the latter, to be honest with you. I think I just look at it like this. Your captain won 4th man of the year, which is rewarded to the best bench player.
Right.
So, and that's your captain. That's supposed to be your best player on the team. So now it could be like, like a Lou Will situation. I understand that the Big 3 is different in the NBA in that aspect, but you look at Jason Richardson had a decent year on Tri-State, who was a non-playoff team when he was on it. And then Larry Sanders, same thing. Larry Sanders had a good season, backing up Reggie Evans on Three-Headed Monsters that was a 500 team, barely snuck into the playoffs. So, I just asked myself, did Tri-State get better losing Amari Stoudemire?
Well,
and
no.
Gaining Larry Sanders and Jason Richardson, and they already had Jason Richardson? I don't think they do. But I think they are also, too, a perfect candidate for a team that if you can draft right, if Nate can draft, you know,
David Hawkins.
can hit well, right. I mean, my God, I don't think David Hawkins can hit the draft class. But if he does, and you bring back David Hawkins, then sure. But to answer your question, that that's a big if.
Oh, definitely.
That's like saying, oh well, if they draft a top 5 player, then yeah, they can compete for a championship. So what does that really say about the team that's currently constructed?
Fair. And I think let's look at the bigger picture here. I'm not even looking at the team just as a whole. You just lost a defensive player of the year and Stat, a guy who's been a key component of the Tri-State.
Yeah.
One, helping them get to their first playoff ever, and then last year making them competitive enough down the stretch when they, Nate Robinson faced injuries last year, and they had their stretches where it looked like they weren't even going to be competing up until week 10. Sure enough, week 8, week 9. It was a weird year last year. Or 2019. It was a little bit different.
It was a very weird year last year. Yes.
Yes. 2020 was definitely weird, but because there was nothing. So, but 2019 was, Nate Robinson missed some time. And so point being, losing Amari Stoudemire all in all is.
He's also like a top 3 scorer.
A huge blow. Yes. A huge blow. I mean, and that's a good way to look at it too, is like, okay, we lost Amari Stoudemire. Did we get better by adding promoting one guy and adding another guy?
No.
Could we have added a different co-captain? I have to agree. I don't know if they did get better.
That to me just means that there's nobody out there.
Well,
I guess Carlos isn't coming back. Boozer. Because you'd think if Nate's captain, the first person he's bringing is Carlos Boozer.
Well, and the reason I pumped the brakes on that is because you have to look at this as, again, going back to the player-centric league. This is a league where it's more about connections than it is probably skill set, in a sense.
Sure.
I don't know how cool Nate Robinson and Jason Richardson and Larry Sanders are. Larry Sanders could be cool with Nate Robinson more than we know. They could have a similar agent. They could have past experiences. Hell, they could just be childhood friends who we don't really know.
They could have just been vibing at the Big 3. You know what I mean?
They could have just been vibing at the Big 3. They went out one night and they're like, you know what? If I become captain, I promise you, stamp it right now, you will be the co-captain of Tri-State. And now he's like, oh man, I just got drunk. I just got drunk and that actually happened. All right. No, I'm just kidding. But, we'll see. Tri-State's definitely gonna have to draft well, like a couple of other of these teams that have their captain spots filled out. And the draft is going to be so interesting. I mean, there's so much I could say about it.
The draft's going to be extremely interesting.
It's so many teams have to draft right, but on the flip side, there's such a deep pool of players and so many guys that are going to be new to the league or have been in the league in years prior and are trying to make it again. I don't know. It's going to be nuts.
I'll just say this though. We're starting to see a bit of an unsettling trend. And that is that everyone wants to be a captain or a co-captain.
Wow. Yeah.
And as much as I applaud, everyone's like, I want to, that just means you want to be part of the Big 3 if you want to be a captain or a co-captain. But is the difference between a top pick, a top draft prospect, and a co-captain that much great that we've seen guys say, I'm not coming back to the Big 3 unless I'm a captain or a co-captain. And I'm starting to wonder that, maybe if the Big 3 reached out to guys like Michael Beasley and Lance Stevenson and, Dwayne Wade, they were like, I'm not interested unless I'm a captain. And, in the 2019 draft, we saw guys like Larry Sanders, Mario Chalmers, David Hawkins until he was picked up by Trilogy. Guys like Andre Owens, until he was made captain of Aliens, were in the draft class. And so that just and those were guys who were okay going through the draft process.
Yeah.
So that to me that signals to me, number one, all right, this must be a pretty loaded draft. That also two signals to me we are in one desperate need of an expansion.
Yeah.
And also two, we're in also a weird stage now where all the co-captains and captains aren't really, I don't want to say big name, or I don't want to say like smaller names as opposed to what they were, but
They're familiar names.
They're familiar names, but they're all now based off of Big 3 background. Which,
Yeah.
as a fan of good basketball, I like.
Mm-hmm.
But as someone who also wants to see this league continue to grow and develop, we were talking about guys like Dwayne Wade, Dwayne Wade, Michael Beasley, Lance Stevenson, and we're ending up with Jason Richardson, Larry Sanders, and now I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think those are all good players. I think they're going to go out there and it's going to be a good competitive game. But the Big 3 also too touts that and is not afraid to advertise the type of names that they are recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been they haven't made. I mean, they got Nick Young.
Well, that's what I was going to say on
Young.
the flip side. There were guys like Nick Young, Jared Jack, Amir Johnson. I mean, those were some of the names that were floating around and that they did secure. So
I just feel like it's been such a different offseason because the last off seasons have all been prioritized on big names. There were 3 or 4 big household names each offseason. And we haven't really gotten that this season. But on the flip side, I will say we've gotten names. I mean, back to Trilogy, Jared Jack and Amir Johnson were 2 guys who were lighting it up in the G League bubble months ago. So they're going to go out there and compete. That's a scary duo.
And
but I think from the casual perspective, I don't know if it's the best thing.
Well, you gotta, this is going to be the year of the biggest turnover. We have to remember about what we just endured, not to mention a hiatus of a year. That doesn't tend to happen. Think about if we had the year last year and the names they were already adding. Think about it. They were adding Zach Randolph. Nick Young pretty much seemed like it was in the bag last year. That was at the very beginning of the start of their offseason and their big name additions. Those were 2 big names right off rip. So sure, there's going to be some changes that have been made. Stoudemire wasn't a coach. Now he's a coach. And so it doesn't seem like he's playing anymore. We're going to see some big turnovers because in a year, a lot can happen. In a year, people have different objectives. They have, they're doing things just a little bit differently because they can't be involved with the Big 3. And once they do that, it carries them away from it. We can't help that.
So you're saying that it's almost like this offseason, there's always turnover, but it's almost like we're getting 2 off seasons worth of people leaving in this one off season, and maybe teams don't have the time or the resources at the moment to fully catch up to that.
I'm saying it like this. Okay, think about where you were in 2019 and where you are now. Well, that's changed, right?
Oh, tons changed.
Okay, now think about if through that whole time you got offered a position, let's say, for the Brooklyn Nets. Would you still be doing a podcast all the time? Maybe not, because you have a lot to do. You have a lot of different priorities, and you can't help that because the Big 3 wasn't around. You take advantage of what you have in front of you, and I think that's just what happened within that year. I think that's why there's a lot of turnover, and I think too that's why we've been able to add guys like Jared Jack, like Amir Johnson, because maybe 2019 Jared Jack's still thinking of a comeback. He doesn't come in 2020. Now he's in a position where he's like, okay, well, I just got done in the G League bubble. Nobody signed me still. I still have to prove my worth, still prove that I can play for an NBA team if that's what he's shooting for. And so he's like, Big 3 has offered that, we've seen that the Big 3 has evidence that they can do that through Joe Johnson. Now I'm going to do it. So, it's just about establishing yourself as a league. And I think guys have different priorities. I think once the league gets back in rhythm, I think that when people understand the excitement that the Big 3 can bring, I think there's going to be a different offseason going into season 5. And I think too, with the names that are being added as co-captains, a lot of guys that have been Big 3 staples in a sense, they're relying on those guys like, hey, you guys did a great job year 3. We want you back for year 4. You guys are a pivotal part to making this thing what it was and getting it back to that stage. So we're going to promote you guys to co-captains. So while it's not the year of the biggest names, like we don't have any, I would say like Joe Johnson type tier additions. I think that because of what they're doing and how they're trying to reestablish themselves, it's going to be good for the long run. That's just my opinion on it. That's just the way I look at it. Um, but we'll see. We don't
We'll
know how
see.
the season's going to go.
Yeah, I certainly do agree with you. And then I guess just the other part of that is just I still think that there's way too many people who are like, I deserve to be a co-captain,
Yeah, well,
and like I feel like this league isn't gonna this league is gonna get to a point where, like, the co-captains and the draft picks are almost like, you know, indistinguishable. And that's just a sign that the league is growing and attracting better talent.
yeah.
So if the tradition is becoming, all right, you ball out for a season, you do well, you become a co-captain somewhere. I don't think that's a realistic thing to keep up.
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic. So, we talked about expansion. That seemed like it was going to be the trajectory 2 years from now at maybe four more teams as the league gets bigger. But I think too, it's just because of the large turn. Like, I don't think we're going to have this kind of turnover next year. That's just me. I don't.
Well,
We
I would
could.
hope so because we've had so many new co-captains.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why there's so many new co-captains. That's why those spots are available. That's why guys want to be co-captains, because there's availability.
I see.
Because of the turnover. Think of Jason Terry. He was in and out.
Right.
Are we ever gonna, like, 10 years from now, are we really gonna remember Jason Terry playing for Trilogy? One, he didn't even play that much, and two, he was gone in 1 year. But he had other priorities. He's coaching or doing his thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's just because the positions are available. Now, I think everybody wants to be a captain or a co-captain because they want to be on a team with their guys. They want to be established. They want a little bit of authority. That's just everybody. I mean, if you're in a sales job, you want to be more than just a guy who's trying to get people into meetings. You want to be the guy who's closing deals and then eventually running teams. That's just the nature of the business, I think. I think ultimately, I think that the big three is doing the right things. I think there are some things that maybe we wouldn't necessarily do if we were involved in the big three. But I think that they have the right mindset in the sense of, like, reestablishing themselves, doing it with the guys that helped them out with year three, filling the voids with those guys that made season three so fun, and then ultimately adding a couple big names and putting themselves back on the map to the fans.
No, I agree, and I do want to reaffirm I'm not a fan of any of these moves. I want to see the most competitive. I don't want to see guys who I know come in and then not play. Like, I don't want another Allen Iverson situation.
Right.
And like, I know Jarrett Jack and Amir Johnson aren't the biggest names in the world, but I know they're gonna come and compete and be good.
Trilogy's gonna be a good team,
and that's all I want. I just want people to be good. I want every team to have a guy who I'm excited to watch play. I just hope that the big three, it's just sort of taken now a shift that I wasn't really expecting to happen so quickly.
Yeah.
Because we saw it from some teams where they really prioritized, like, I'm going to get the best guys. And we talked about teams like that. But now it seems like it's everybody.
I know what's bothering you.
What's bothering me?
I know deep down what your body or your heart's telling you. You just want a guy who's going to be able to compete with Joe for that MVP spot.
I do.
That's what it is. I know you've been talking about it. I know that subconsciously you're probably thinking it.
I do.
I think that's a possibility still. I think it's a possibility still. I know that Joe had an outstanding year. I know that guy doesn't take time off, it seems like. But I think guys are going to get better. I think the league's going to get better team-wise. I think there's still additions to be made. Jeff K talked about a defensive stud coming in here.
That must have been Larry Sanders, right?
Was it Larry Sanders? Maybe so. It was.
I think it was Larry Sanders.
But maybe there's more additions to come. Who knows?
I don't know.
There's spots open.
I'm done trying to decipher those.
Okay, fair enough. I think we speculated long enough. Those are the teams that now have their co-captain spots now established. Trilogy, Tri-State. I guess Three's Company now.
Three's Company, yeah.
And Killer Threes now has their captain. They still have a co-captain spot. So let's think
Power's
about the team.
done.
Yeah, Power's done. Ghost Ballers is done. So let's think about the teams that aren't done yet. I mean, outside of the teams that haven't announced anything, Enemies has a co-captain, two co-captain
Two
spots
co-captains.
open.
Enemies only has one player right now.
Wow, that's interesting. Aliens potentially has a spot open. Killer 3s has a spot open that we think they could be promoted from within, but we don't know. So still a lot of captain spots to be filled, and still a long way to go till that June 4th. Well,
That's true. Not really a long way to go,
I wouldn't
but
say a long way
it's
to go.
rapidly getting there, and I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. There's a lot to talk about. And it's gonna be a fun season. I think all in all, we talk about all this, you know, what might be up in the air and stuff. All in all, we get Big 3 basketball back, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. Teams look competitive, and we're getting these teams ready and ready to go. So Combine is in 4 days.
What?
Or I'm sorry, not the Combine. Tryouts are in 4 days in DC.
Are they? Is it really? Yeah, I guess it is
The
4
22nd,
days, right? Wow. Yeah.
The 27th
4 days.
in Dallas will be the other tryout. So could be by next episode. We know how at least one of the tryouts went, and which of the probably 5 to 10 guys are going to be out at the Combine. So
we'll I think we're gonna, we'll give you some more comp after Dallas or after DC. We know a couple guys going to DC. We'll let you know what happens.
We got a couple guys.
We got a couple connections there.
All right, guys. We appreciate everyone who's tuned in. I think we're going to wrap this one up here.
Yeah.
Appreciate everyone who's tuned in. More news is going to be set to come, obviously. Let us know what your favorite move has been so far in the off season. Obviously, there's been already a lot that took place within 1 week. Make sure you guys are liking, commenting, and subscribing on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter for quick updates, notifications. Will literally did one during the episode. If that tells you.
Yes, you watch. You can if you're on YouTube, you watched me do it.
So it's the fastest news when it comes to the Big 3. Appreciate
don't say that, please. I just started a new job. Please don't say that.
He's the fastest. Make sure everyone knows that. Appreciate everyone who's tuned in, and we'll see you guys next time.